Penn State versus Notre Dame. It's the Orange Bowl. Can James Franklin finally win the big game? Can Notre Dame complete a pass beyond 5 yards? Two experts are going to give their perspective on a Penn State win and a Notre Dame win here on this Locked On Crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Irish your first listens and watches every single day. My name is Seyko, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Tyler Wojciak of Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5 and you will get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right, guaranteed, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Tyler, it's great to get acquainted here remotely, but this is a huge game. I mean, historically, 9-9-1. So the score is going to be settled in this case, and that's how we're going to start the show. The case for a Notre Dame win, the case for a Penn State win, because this is a close spread. It's 1.5 points favoring the Fighting Irish. Can James Franklin do it? Can Notre Dame overcome some of its offensive struggles if it's forced out of its comfort zone? And then injuries are piling up on both sides. But Tyler, the floor is yours. The case for a Notre Dame win, both pro Fighting Irish points and negative Penn State points. Why do you think Notre Dame gets a win in the Orange Bowl here?
I think it's just because Notre Dame proved they can beat anyone in the country when they knocked off Georgia in the Sugar Bowl last week. And look, I'm not mistaking this Georgia team for the Bulldogs of 2021 or 2022 when they just steamrolled everybody in their path. But this is a team that came back to beat Texas in the SEC championship with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback. They also had the second best odds to win the national championship before the playoff even started. And Notre Dame was still able to travel south and beat them by double digits in front of a pretty heavy Georgia crowd there down in the Caesars Superdome. And I think Penn State is a really good team. They have not proved that they can do it just yet. We all know about Franklin's record against top 5 teams. I don't have to remind you of that. And I'm not even saying that they can't do it. We just haven't seen it yet. And I think we just watched Notre Dame do it last week. And this is going to be a very tough battle. Both teams are battle tested, but I like the Irish here because of what they showed last week going up against Georgia.
That's definitely a Georgia team that's not as not as competitive as it was. Going from Carson Beck to Gunnar Stockton is a big deal. And Notre Dame, now Notre Dame had the opportunity to prepare for what a Gunnar Stockton offense could look like, whereas Texas kind of had to adjust on the fly and probably caught them off guard to an extent in that moment. I also think that look, the Fighting Irish did win by 13, 23-10, but they did get some outlier plays. A strip sack fumble right before the end of the first half. Say Georgia knees it, right? Or plays a little more conservatively in that instance. But that's a great play by the Notre Dame defense and a top 5 defense objectively. And then the kick return for a touchdown, and I don't know what Georgia's special teams is doing there. So if you kind of take away those outlier plays, that really is a close game, and then Notre Dame was able to get Georgia off kilter. Georgia had to throw the football when they didn't want to with Gunnar Stockton, and they had some success through the air. I thought there were some big plays that I was not expecting from the Georgia passing game, but I felt like Notre Dame was able to settle in and do what it wanted to do traditionally, rely on its defense and win behind its ground game, and they did just that. So I wonder if you take some of those those outlier plays away, and this one's a little closer, how much is Georgia in that game a little further? That's what I take away from that game.
Well, it's definitely closer if Kirby just nailed it right before the end of the half. When they came out there in the shotgun, I looked at my friend who I was watching the game with. I was like, I cannot believe they're actually going to do this
with Gunnar Stockton.
Sure enough, it comes back to bite them. Notre Dame converts on that opportunity. They end up scoring on the kick return right out of the gate in the second half. But on one hand, it's fair to consider that an outlier, but Notre Dame also has more points on defense and special teams than anyone else in the country by 20 full points. They are number 1 in takeaways. So when that's part of the game plan, it doesn't feel so much like an outlier. And I'm with you. It would have been a closer game if those plays didn't happen. But I also think Notre Dame would have adjusted their offensive game plan in the second half. They were running the ball a lot. When they got the ball at the end of the game, obviously the score was still in the balance. Notre Dame was only up 13, but there was a world where Georgia could have gotten the ball back, scored, get a stop, score again, and then potentially win that game. But Georgia has 3 top 15 picks on that defense. They've got Williams, Walker, and Starks. And Notre Dame ran the ball over and over and over again to burn 7.5 minutes off the clock. They didn't have to pass in that situation. And Georgia defense that has been dominant. Even though this isn't quite as dominant, we all saw what they did against Texas in the regular season and in the SEC championship. Like, those guys are really, really good. But at the most important moment of the game, Notre Dame's offensive line specifically wore them down, and they were able to ice the game. Like, that had nothing to do with the outliers, the backup quarterback, or anything. In the game's biggest moments, Notre Dame won in the trenches handily, and that's why they won that game.
All right, it's my turn. I'll give you the case for a Penn State victory in this game against Notre Dame. For pro Penn State, so James Franklin struggles in the big game, right? Okay, well then Boise State doesn't happen. Is that not a big game? That's the Fiesta Bowl, the first round of the college football playoff. SMU didn't win the ACC title, but they got there in its first season being a part of a Power 4 conference, so they are legitimate. So it's what James Franklin did in 2018, 2019, 21, 22, 23 against Michigan, against Ohio State has no bearing on a game against Notre Dame. These two teams are unfamiliar with one another. I do not care that, because they lost in 2022 with a different coaching staff, with different players, that is somehow going to affect them playing Notre Dame in the early parts of 2025. So this team with Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen as the coordinators, Drew Aller is a more seasoned veteran quarterback. Guys who came from that elite 2022 recruiting class are now veterans, as Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, denied Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter. We'll talk more about injuries, but he's supposed to be available. Jalen Reed, Zachy Wheatley, all these guys that were younger football players are now the faces of the football team, and they're very good, I might add. From just kind of look at Notre Dame, Notre Dame hasn't been forced outside of its comfort zone, so it's easier said than done here. But what happens if Penn State is able to force Riley Leonard into some more obvious passing situations? This is a team that, yes, they don't necessarily need to pass the football, but when I look at yards per attempt, okay, around the 70s, right? But then yards per completion, 122nd in the country. I mean, that's 12 spots away from being the worst. So if you can somehow force Notre Dame into those situations, the offense isn't going to be able to move the football as much. And then there's the injuries, which we will talk about more like individually and the impact of it. But Penn State's dealing with Abdul Carter not being 100%. Tyler, you're going to be able to explain this better, but when I look at it from afar from Notre Dame, Howard Cross, Jeremiah Love, Riley Mills is out. And then someone who is more of a rotational guy, but definitely contributes in Notre Dame's ground game, is Cooper Flanagan. And I don't think people are putting enough stock into the fact that him as an additional blocker, that's a big loss for them when they need to run the football to stay ahead and be competitive in this game. So it's a combination of injuries. It's a combination of the fact that Penn State's offense is a little more balanced. Georgia's offense wasn't going to be able to provide enough resistance to keep. Notre Dame benefited from the fact that Georgia wasn't going to be able to get into a shootout, if you will. You have to respect the fact that Penn State's offense can play keep away. They can run the ball effectively. They can throw the ball too, and they don't turn the football over as much. So I wonder how the entirety of the Fighting Irish game plan changes when you have an opponent that doesn't play so much into Notre Dame's strengths.
Yeah, I mean, I won't argue with you at all on the injury
Please
front.
do.
It's staggering that they're even in this position because they have already lost all those guys. It's like, not only are they losing guys, they're losing their absolute best players. Like Benjamin Morrison is arguably the best player on the entire team. He's probably going to be a first-round pick at cornerback. They lost him right around the halfway point in the year. And when that happened, I was like, I don't know how this team is going to respond. I think that changes the ceiling for this team. Insert Leonard Moore, true freshman, who is now a freshman All-American and is actually playing even better than Benjamin Morrison was, which doesn't even seem possible. Then going up against Georgia, the loss of Riley Mills, you're thinking that's going to hurt this team. Georgia's going to be able to run the ball. That didn't happen at all. They held Georgia to 2.3 yards per carry with ETN, who's like one of the best running backs in the country. That's a future NFL guy. So I don't know how they're doing it, but they're doing it. And they managed to beat Georgia with Jeremiah Love only getting 19 yards on 6 carries because he got hurt in that game as well. So from the injury standpoint, it's easy to point it all out and say, how is Notre Dame still doing this? I don't have an answer for you. But in terms of the game plan, It does sound simple. Just force Notre Dame to throw it and you'll beat them. But I think every single team that Notre Dame has played this season has had the same game plan, and it hasn't really worked out for any other team except Northern Illinois, and that was in week 2.
Well, let's make some sense of these injuries, how Notre Dame would overcome Jeremiah Love. He's going to play, but he's going to be limited. So what can Jadarian Price, Aeneas Williams, and Riley Leonard in combination, how can they pick up the slack? Is Eli Raridan and Mitchell Evans going to be able to, in a tandem, help out in the passing game, help out in the blocking? We'll talk about Notre Dame's injuries, plus Abdul Carter. Is he going to play? How effective will he be on the other side of this break? And today's show is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Now, that's definitely happened to me. I've had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money can make it so easy for you to track all of them down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings, brings everything together in one place. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even your goals that you want to hit in the new year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. And one of the best features is the subscription tracker. You can use it to cancel services you don't use anymore, and you'll save a ton. Plus, with the goals feature, you can automatically set aside money for the future, so no more stressing about budgeting every single month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Again, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, Tyler, let's jump back into this conversation and pick up with where Notre Dame can find some more passing success. Now, Georgia's defense is Georgia's defense, and Notre Dame, you just do whatever you need to do to win. Well, Penn State's going to do just that, and I know what Indiana set out to do. I know what Texas A&M set out to do, and I know what Georgia tried to do. I mean, Penn State's still got a top 10 run defense for what it's worth. They swarmed to stop Ashton Genty. And Jeremiah Love not being 100% is a big deal. There's an argument to be made that he is the best running back out of all the ones that are here. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. I think the tandem of the two are better than Jeremiah Love, but that's saying something, right? That's saying something of how good Jeremiah Love is. But there's not a stark drop-off. Jadarian Price can still get things done. They cycle to Aeneas Williams as well. And, of course, Riley Leonard. But like Penn State, when they swarmed after Ashton Genty, I feel like that's going to be the defensive game plan, to swarm after Riley Leonard and take him away as a runner. So how do you think Notre Dame counters all of that?
I think, first off, they're going to try and let Jeremiah Love give it a go in this game. I think he's earned the right to do that, and if he's able to go through practice, I know he had a brace on earlier this week. I don't expect him to play with the brace, but he's going to go out there and give it a try. We'll see how effective he's going to be. I'll just be honest, I don't have super high expectations. I saw that his rushing over-under totals like 42.5. I would personally probably take the under. That being said, Jadarian Price is fully capable. He would probably be running back number one on like 130, or maybe not 130, but 125 and 134 at FBS teams. He is just
nice luxury to
that
have.
Good, right? And Penn State's dealing with the same thing, right? You need two great running backs, and both teams have them. So this is really a great opportunity for Price to step up and be that every single down back. The one thing that Price is so good at is getting to the outside and breaking tackles. He has 521 yards after contact this season. He has 21 runs over 10 more yards, and he's been a breakaway type of player. Like if he gets the edge, he could be gone. And he's had some big, big touchdowns this year. He had a huge touchdown against Texas A&M in the season opener, the go-ahead touchdown. And he had like a 34-yard touchdown run against USC to give Notre Dame some cushion there late in the second half, right after Jeremiah Love got hurt. So I'm sure he's super excited about this opportunity. And I think when I've been watching Penn State throughout these playoffs, I think they've got a really good defense. They're super athletic in the front seven. If there's one issue that at least I've noticed is that they can miss tackles. I believe they have 57 missed tackles over the course of the past 3 games. Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love as well. Those two guys are so good at breaking tackles. Love has 675 yards after contact this season. So, again, he might not even be able to go, but Riley Leonard has 491. So the biggest thing for Penn State is going to be bringing those guys down. I think they are going to be a little bit conservative with Riley Leonard and how they use him in the run game early on, but as the game goes on, you started to see it against Georgia. They started running him a lot more, especially once Jeremiah Love went out. So it's going to be a lot at Price early. They're going to mix in the true freshman, Aeneas Williams as well, who's really come on late in the season. And then later on in the game, especially in like third or fourth down situations, expect to see Riley Leonard run the ball a lot more.
Help me make sense of the passing attack. And Jordan Faison had a big game against Indiana, but that's Indiana's defense is not to the extent, not to the caliber of Penn State's defense. I think A.J. Harris kind of, and I look at this the same way. It's kind of Notre Dame secondary is going to take away Penn State's wide receivers, particularly the cornerbacks, because I want to get your thoughts on how they intend to try to stop Tyler Warren. I think Aiden Schuler has his work cut out for him. I know what Xavier Watts does, kind of like Zach Wheatley over here at Penn State, is that he plays center field. So it's not really going to be Xavier Watts versus Tyler Warren. It's going to be Aiden Schuler versus Tyler Warren. But this is the similarity here as far as how they're built. Penn State's wide receivers aren't great. Notre Dame's wide receivers aren't great. So how are they moving the football through the air if it's 3rd and 8? Are they just going to stay committed to the ground game? They're still going to try to run it? Or if they're down by 7 late in the game, how are they going to try to move the football through the air? Mitchell Evans, I know, has that potential to be a superstar tight end. Injuries, unfortunately. Same thing with Eli Raritan. Like, I respect these players, but I do see the struggles. If Notre Dame is forced into these situations, just how do they overcome them?
Yeah, it's a fair question to ask. And Notre Dame just frankly has not really been put in a situation at all this year where they really had to do it. Even in that Northern Illinois loss, it wasn't like they were down a bunch late. They had a chance to run out the clock, and then Northern Illinois just kicked a game-winning field goal there at the end. But Notre Dame wasn't like trying to mount a comeback or anything late in the game. So there really hasn't been a situation late in the game. And I think that's been the big talking point in every single one of these big games is, well, what happens then? I don't really know. I can say that Jordan Faison has looked really, really good as of late. He had that big game against Indiana in the first round of the college football playoff. He hurt his ankle in the season opener, and throughout much of the year, he just never really looked healthy. He re-aggravated it against Louisville. So now seeing him healthy, he has become the go-to option on the outside, and he is just a very slippery, very elusive player. They have Mitchell Evans. He's come up big in like third and short situations like that. I still don't think he's like fully recovered from his torn ACL last year. There's something just, it doesn't look all the way back with him. Bo Collins, the transfer from Clemson, has been a decent player at times in the boundary, but it's going to be a big test. And I think any team who puts Notre Dame in a situation where they have to pass the ball late in the game is going to have an advantage, but some different guys have stepped up along the way. Collins had the touchdown last week. Faison had several catches. He probably would have had more, but 2 plays were wiped off because of penalties. So it'd be tough, but I think it's just going to be spreading the ball out and trying to find mismatches when they're there because Notre Dame doesn't have a true number 1 option at tight end or wide receiver.
And that's what I mean. I don't think there are a lot of mismatches when you compare, and it's on both sides. Now, Tyler Warren is Tyler Warren. I mean, he was a Heisman contender. So when you compare the two sides, it's really just Tyler Warren because I would trust Notre Dame's, and as a Penn State podcast host, I'm not afraid to admit that the defensive backs overall, it's going to be a battle between Aiden Schuler, Xavier Watts against Tyler Warren, and how they decide to bracket him, and then Al Golden in this as well. What is he going to scheme up defensively? But the wide receivers on the outside for both sides, Trey Wallace, Amari Evans for Penn State, and then Jordan Faison, Bo Collins, great house for Notre Dame, where they're going to struggle against A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber and Zion Tracy, and then Jalen Reed and Zachy Wheatley are going to be really responsible for trying to cover an Eli Raritan and Mitchell Evans, who are just going to have to be more involved in this passing game. Tyler, quickly before we go back to break, what is kind of the other pressing thing? Because you mentioned tackling, and Penn State's tackling has not been good this season. So I'm glad you brought that up. Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, depending on what his situation is, how much usage he's going to get in this game, or Jadarian Price, all of those guys are going to be able to get extra yardage, in Penn State, like they did with Ashton Genty, really have to swarm to the football if they're going to do that, because I think they can win the one-on-one matchups outside and devote more resources to run defense. But when you look at Penn State, you say, okay, how can Penn State fix this in the same way that I'm saying, how does Notre Dame fix its passing attack, or at least has some better options there?
I think in the case of Notre Dame, when you look at this matchup with Penn State, obviously the Tyler Warren matchup jumps out. You've already alluded to it. And what is Notre Dame going to do to counter that? I can tell you they're going to run man coverage on the outside. That's going to happen. They should have full faith in Leonard Moore and Christian Gray to run man coverage. And sometimes Penn State is they're probably going to beat him, and they're willing to accept that so long as they don't score a touchdown on those plays. Like they've been perfect for. Smith, the wide receiver on Georgia, had that big play that wasn't negated, but it was brought back because of the Parker Jones penalty on the sideline. But when I look at Warren, obviously that's a mismatch because he's physically so imposing. He's like 6'6", 250 and can move. I don't think Notre Dame is going to run man coverage on him one-on-one at all in the entire game. I think there's going to be one man on him, and then I think they're going to bracket coverage, bring in linebackers, and bring in safety help as well, because I think they look at the challenge on the outside as, look, if we completely shut down these wide receivers, eliminate them from the conversation, then you can use either two safeties or one safety in the sense of Xavier Watts kind of like hovering and then maybe a linebacker covering him in the short yardage situation. And then if he goes beyond that, that's when Xavier Watts comes in and then they double him. But I think in a game like this, both offenses are going to try to get the ball to their stars as much as possible in the run game or the pass game. And Penn State likes to run and throw the ball to their running backs and like to give the ball to Tyler Warren and by any means possible. So I think that is the biggest thing that I'm concerned about as a Notre Dame fan going into this matchup. Like the running backs are obviously scary, but Tyler Warren is just a different beast.
Yeah, he is. I'm at tight end, finishing 7th in Heisman voting. I mean, that's something to behold in its own right. I mean, this season had a lot of crazy finishes, 12-team playoff, Travis Hunter winning the Heisman, but that in itself, that Tyler Warren even got the respect as a tight end. There's still some other key matchups we have to get to, plus our final predictions, our final score predictions. We're going to go on the record for this game in the Orange Bowl. We'll tell you more about some of those matchups, including Penn State's offensive line. They struggled with Boise State's blitz. Well, if Boise State could have that kind of success, Notre Dame's definitely going to. We're going to discuss it more after a break. And welcome back for our final segment on this Locked On crossover. I look at Penn State's offensive line versus Notre Dame's defensive line, and that certainly concerns me. I know for the sake of the matchup, Howard Cross not being 100% and whether or not he's a full go, I don't know if it's a similar situation to Jeremiah Love, so Tyler, you'll be able to shed some light on that. But Riley Mills being out, that's just unfortunate. I want Notre Dame to be at its best for the sake of a Penn State victory, though. This is a big deal. Riley Mills is Notre Dame's best pass rusher. And then Howard Cross is just your best overall defensive lineman with what he can do in run defense and in the pass rush. I still have my concerns about a guy like an Oben at defensive end. And Notre Dame was still able to get success. Georgia's offensive line is still comprised of a bunch of different high-end 4-stars and 5-stars. And the Fighting Irish were still able to get pressure up the middle. Now, part of that is, hey, that's a new quarterback, relatively. Gunnar Stockton is not starting a lot of games. Yes, he's a veteran, but he's not as experienced as you would like him to be. And Notre Dame is just able to manufacture pressure. I am concerned with the way that Boise State had success against Penn State. That's probably the first time I've seen Drew Aller under that much duress since Michigan and Ohio State 2023. So that's saying something. Penn State's offensive line has done well, but then Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, if a group of 5 team can do that to Penn State's offensive line and pass protection, then what can Notre Dame do here?
Yeah, that's the biggest matchup in the entire game. I think Notre Dame's defensive line. Yeah, you could really say it on both sides of the ball. But that is one that I'm most interested in because this is a depleted defensive line unit. But for Cross, it's not like Love. Cross is definitely going to play. I expect him to be close to 100%, but he's been dealing with injuries like all season long, and he's still been highly productive, like has 4 sacks as a defensive tackle. That's pretty tough to do. That's not a position that really lends itself to racking up a bunch of stats. And he's just a game wrecker at times. He's not the biggest guy. He's only 6'1", 290 pounds, but he is so quick and he has such good hands that he can just find his way in the backfield. But without Riley Mills and with whatever they've kind of put together on the defensive line, it's less about any one individual guy, and it has more to do with the way that they work together. And a big part of that is Al Golden, the defensive coordinator, and the way that he schemes up blitzes. Like a lot of times, not just against Georgia, but you see when these teams go up against an Al Golden defense, they have no idea where the pressure is coming from on any given down. Last year, when Notre Dame played USC, this was when USC was still good. They were a top 10 team, undefeated. Caleb Williams was having a good year. He played his worst game of his collegiate career against Notre Dame. And from the first snap, you could tell he had no idea what he was seeing. It got a little bit better in the second half. I mean, he's still a great player, and there's still Lincoln Riley on the other side, so they've figured out some answers. But I think that is the key for this Notre Dame defense. Like, as my friend Patrick Falkenberg said, I'm convinced that Al Golden could go find 22 guys in a dorm, put them together, give him a couple weeks to prepare, and he can hold an opponent under 20 yards. Like, he is just that good. And Penn State fans might feel some type of way because that's one of your own. This guy actually scored a touchdown inside Notre Dame Stadium back in 1990 wearing a Nittany Lion uniform, and now he's the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame trying to end your season. And if Notre Dame is able to get a win, Al Golden is going to be reason number one as to why that happens.
There's a lot of historical implications here, of course. I mean, the score is settled. Bragging rights, this not only gets you into the first ever national title from a 12-team playoff format, but it's 9-1. Al Golden, maybe he feels some type of way. He was in the running for Penn State's vacant head coaching job, and then James Franklin was ultimately hired. So for Al Golden, I wonder how much he's thinking about it, but it certainly does matter to him personally. You can't deny that one. This game across the board is going to be close. It has to be a rock fight because Notre Dame won't let it get into a shootout type of situation. And Penn State could. Penn State can win so many different ways. They can win in a rock fight. They can win in a shootout. So high scoring, low scoring, because this team overall, and I'm excited for the chess matches on both sides. Andy Kotelnicki versus Al Golden and Mike Denbrock versus Tom Allen. Is there a player, maybe it is a coordinator, that really needs to step up in this game for you to make a difference for a Notre Dame victory?
Yeah, I would say it's got to be Jordan Faison on the outside because Notre Dame is going to have to get a little bit more production on the outside, and he has become the guy for them. We've talked about him a little bit already, but it was interesting late in the game in a couple huge moments. Notre Dame has a bunch of talented players on offense. Like they've got Jadarian Price, and even though Love was out, like they could go to Mitchell Evans. There's a critical 4th and 1 play where Riley Leonard rolled out, and you could tell it was just an option route to Faison. He could go inside, he could go outside. It was just basically find a soft spot on the field, not even necessarily in a zone, and we're going to get you the ball on this huge play. He got it, but then they called it back because of an illegal shift. Then fast forward later on in the game, Notre Dame just needs one more first down to ice the game. They run this really creative end around to Jordan Faison. He gets it, but they had an illegal motion there as well. So despite the fact that these plays were removed because of penalties, I thought it was really telling that, hey, in the game's biggest moments, they went to Faison. And I think that they're going to continue to go to him in this game, and they're going to have to take some shots downfield. They didn't have to do it against Georgia. I think they're going to have to do it in this game. I think he's going to be the guy they go to, and he's going to have to step up, make some big plays.
I'll say from Penn State's perspective, I think it's Abdul Carter. I think he's the X factor here, and that's he's trending in the right direction, at least from what we're hearing, is that his full intention is to leave the rejuvenation chamber and play in this game, but it's going to be in a hybrid role. I can't see him playing a full workload at defensive end, hand in the dirt, and getting contacted. He has an upper body injury, getting contacted on every single given play going up against a lineman. But what if you use him in this hybrid linebacker where he's not necessarily, act as a QB spy. Basically, your job is to take away Riley Leonard. You are going to follow him. You are going to be a pass defender, try to get into his passing lanes if he decides to tuck in and run. You are one of the most athletic players. So fortunately for Abdul Carter and Penn State's situation, it's not a lower body injury. He can run, he can make cuts, but he probably can't make a tackle every single time. So if he acts as that permanent quarterback spy, and if Tom Allen can develop this defensive scheme to where Notre Dame has all the game film, has all the game footage, and I know that Abdul Carter did these things in his sophomore and freshman campaign, but if you're going off of this season alone, Carter doesn't have this full-time role where he's doing that, and I wonder in this game if just by the surprise of it, the newness of it is going to play a big factor. I think Penn State's interior offensive line also needs to get it done. There were communication issues, something in that blitz pickup against Boise State. If I had to point out somebody for Notre Dame, I would say that just for me personally, Mitchell Evans, Eli Raridan, because Notre Dame likes to go 3 tight end. They just need something else in the passing game. I think that is somewhat of a mismatch. Raridan's size, Mitchell Evans' size, is going to be a lot for a Jalen Reed to cover consistently. And then there is a little bit more athleticism to where, okay, is Kobe King going to be able to defend them in the pass? How about Tony Rojas, Dom DeLuca? When both of them go out for passes, the linebackers are going to have a lot of responsibility there.
Yeah, no doubt. I think this is going to be an incredible matchup, and something that's sort of been a common theme throughout the preparation is these teams are built very similarly. It's true, built on running the football, two great defenses, and just overall two programs who have been really desperate to get back to the pinnacle of the sport. And the fact that the winner of this game gets to move on to the national championship, like someone's going to be having a party in South Beach. It's just a matter of who.
So Tyler, who is it for you? I'll let you give your score prediction first. Is Notre Dame going to the national title against most likely Ohio State, but let's not count out Texas, right? Arizona State gave them a scare, so who's to say that Texas won't give the Buckeyes a scare? Is it Notre Dame or is it Penn State in your mind going to Atlanta?
So all week I've been saying that I think that this game against Penn State is actually going to be a tougher challenge for Notre Dame than Georgia, even though I think when you look at the overall talent on the roster, Georgia is a better team, and they obviously have Kirby Smart, who is now the best coach in college football ever since Nick Saban retired. But when you consider the circumstances and the fact that Notre Dame, one, they just played Georgia compared to Penn State playing Boise State, and even though that's a physical game, it just is not the same physical toll on the body like a Georgia game is. And then, the fact that there's a little bit less rest for Notre Dame, I just think that this all makes for an absolute battle that's going to go on for a full 60 minutes. I could see this game going into overtime. That would not shock me at all. But ultimately, I like Notre Dame to pull this one out 24-20. And I do think that Notre Dame is going to have to come back in this game. I don't know if it's going to be late in the second half. I think Penn State's going to come out firing, ready to go. They're a little bit more fresh than Notre Dame is right now. And I think that there's going to be a deficit of maybe it's 10-3, 13-3. Notre Dame is going to be really put to the test, but I think that Riley Leonard and the team answer the call. They pull away late, and I just think they're going to lean on their physicality and try to do basically what Ohio State did to Penn State at the end of the regular season game and try to do the same thing in this game, much like they did to Georgia a week ago.
That is the blueprint, or what Oregon did in getting into a shootout and just saying our offensive weapons are better than yours, which in this case, Notre Dame, Drew Aller is a better passer than Riley Leonard. Tyler Warren's a better offensive weapon than anything that Notre Dame has to offer. And that personally for me is the difference. I smiled there, not because you're picking Notre Dame. Like I said, this is a coin flip. There's a reason the spread is at 1.5. It is going to be close. There might be an overtime factor here. It's because my score prediction was Penn State 24 and Notre Dame 20. I just think Penn State. So I am banking on the fact that everybody else has said, probably, Locked On Hoosiers, probably Locked On Texas A&M probably had the same case of hey, this is how you stop Notre Dame. And I feel like Penn State is a little more prepared to be able to do that because Drew Aller can make the throws that Texas A&M couldn't, that Indiana couldn't. They can stop and they can be physical with Notre Dame. And yes, they're going to get worn down, but look at the way that they handled a Boise State. Ohio State is on a different level. And in that Big Ten championship game, that's Penn State's kryptonite, honestly, is having 3 elite wide receivers. There are only a few teams that do have that, and that's Ohio State and Oregon. Well, Penn State's not playing either of those teams. So Penn State actually matches up. It's not an advantageous matchup, but they're at least prepared for this situation. They can handle this. It's going to be close. I don't think it's an absolute blowout. You're probably confident in a Notre Dame win. I'm confident in a Penn State win. So let's see where the chips fall where they may. Tyler, it's been a great conversation. This is one of the better crossovers that I've done, one of the better conversations that I've had overall, and it's because this matchup has so much to offer from so many perspectives. Penn State versus Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl for the first ever 12-team format national championship. Tyler, I appreciate the time. I'm glad we could do this crossover episode. Thank you for your insight and analysis into the Fighting Irish.
Of course, man. Anytime. Enjoy the game.
And make sure that you subscribe to both platforms, Locked On Irish, Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Tyler Wojciak of Locked On Irish. I'm Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for checking out this crossover episode, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.